All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending another one of the Just Us weekly webinar educational series. I am here with someone I absolutely adore, Dr. Jerica Wesley. Thank you for being here today, Jerica.
Thank you, Tabitha, for having me.
So I think we're going over such an important topic today because grief is something that people are either really good at talking about it, in my experience, or they completely ignore it until it overwhelms them. So I'm super excited to get this webinar started with you today. And for those of you watching, if you don't know who I am, my name is Tabitha Justice. I am the owner of Just Us Retirement Solution. And what we are is we are a full retirement company, and we are what's considered an education and collaborative focused company. What that means is we do not pretend like we know everything. We collaborate with other experts and we share educational opportunities, which is exactly what we're doing here today with Jerica. I am not a grief expert, but Jerica is. So we are going to start going through this. Jerica, would you like to introduce yourself first to get started?
Sure. Well, again, I am Dr. Jerica Wesley. I am a licensed professional counselor in West Virginia. My area of interest has really shifted to supporting individuals navigating reproductive loss. So, folks who are seeking to build their family and had experiences with miscarriage, stillbirth, abortion, I've really gravitated to that particular population. And so I do share with folks that grief work is something that I'm very familiar with. It's a real passion point of mine. And I'm just hopeful that there will be something said during our time today to support you, to support others on their journey today.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And we have very similar goals. So for us, for my goals, when I invite guests on, it's a couple different things.
Mhm.
Number one, we want people to really be able to have a self education moment to learn something from it. But then we want them to take what they've learned and share it with someone in their community. We love the idea of encouraging people to have conversations about really tough topics. And
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about your goals out of this today.
Yeah, so my goals for today, I have two. The first one being is exploring how grief may be experienced. And we know that in society, there's some expectations that can be considered around grief. And we also want to offer some insights to some very specific coping mechanisms that we could, share to support others, or we could also include them into our practice. And also, we're going to share some resources and some information, tools and strategies that you can take away with you today to begin to apply.
I love that because it's not just like many things, it's not just
Mhm,
learning about a
mhm,
topic, but it's
mhm.
learning about how to help work through that topic, resources
Yeah,
that are available. So
absolutely.
I love that. All right. So there's three different types of grief, right?
Yes, there are three. There are certainly many, but the three that I'm going to highlight today are anticipatory grief. Now, that is the experience when you're more so on alert to a grief experience, something that you're expecting to happen soon. So, you could be experiencing emotions associated with grief before that expected loss has actually occurred.
Okay.
Yeah. With complicated grief, this is one where our bodies and our experiences where it's more heightened. It's a heightened state of mourning that is constant. So
Oh,
yeah, when we're navigating experiences with complicated grief, we can expect to have some experiences of disbelief, maybe even avoidance, intense experiences with emotional pain, maybe physical pain, And there can be some anger, bitterness, or sorrow that's kind of intertwined with that. It's a very heavy experience. It can be very debilitating.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then disenfranchised grief. I'm
Mhm.
curious about this one.
Yeah, so with disenfranchised grief, it can be very complicated. Um, in my work with reproductive loss and supporting individuals with miscarriage, miscarriage is a very taboo topic. And
Mhm.
so, since there is not often an opportunity to have a funeral or a service for losses such as a pregnancy loss, it's considered like a disenfranchised grief. And experiences with a spouse, an ex-spouse that's passed, it may be
Yeah.
perceived as not socially acceptable to grieve, or experiences with the loss of a job. It's situations that are complex with disenfranchised grief, and could further complicate how we move through that process and accept that it can even be a grief experience.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to compare this in a way and see if this makes sense.
Yeah.
So, since we work with a lot of people who are nearing retirement, do I have this right? It's
Mhm.
almost like if you anticipate it, it's maybe you really, really love your job, but you know it's coming to an end. Like maybe you're disabled and you can no longer work. So, anticipatory grief is when you know it's coming and you're heightened thoughts about it.
Mhm.
Complicated grief. So when I think about that, is that where maybe you're in a job that is very stressful, not supportive, it's affecting your health, it's affecting everything in your life.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then disenfranchised, maybe that is where, kind of like you said, like maybe you just can't move forward in ways that you want. And it's hard to discuss that grief with other people.
Mhm. Mhm. It's hard to discuss it, and it's also difficult for people to acknowledge that this experience is a grief experience for you.
I have never considered before 3 different types. That makes a
Mhm.
lot of sense.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, you ready for me to move forward?
Let's move on.
All right.
Yeah. And so with the layers of grief, I always kind of think of it as an onion, right? Because there's
Mhm,
so many layers in this experience. And there are certainly some emotional aspects that can come up when we're grieving or we're broaching this
mhm.
task of grief. And there's certainly some physical ones. So with emotional, as I shared, we can have those experiences of shock, numbness, sadness, tearfulness, even
Mhm.
anger, right? Depression and yearning, those are some of the most kind of common or ones that we think of when someone is entering their grief process. And physically, I feel like sometimes, and I would love to hear your thoughts, Tabitha, like with the physical components of grief, I think we might miss some of those. And physically, it's like it could be these experiences of tightness, in
Mhm.
our chest or our throat. We could be nauseous. We could have headaches that just pop up.
Mhm.
We're in this different place of being on alert differently in our body. We can respond to it with some emotional things, but physically, the tension can really have an impact on our body.
Yeah. So, I don't mean to keep bringing this back to work, it's just what I do all the time.
Yeah,
So,
please.
this is what it really makes me think about when you talk about the physical manifestation.
Mhm.
So, I have people all the time that come to me and they're on like 3 or 4 blood pressure medications, anxiety medications, and, then when they quit the job, they don't need that medication anymore, and they say to
Mhm.
me all the time, "I did not realize how unhappy I was at my
Yeah,
job." Yeah.
yeah.
And I'll tell
Mhm.
you another one that I see a lot too is, couples. I just worked with this couple. They It's the only job he's ever had. He's worked this job his entire life, and he was kind of angry, and him and his wife argued a lot. And then once he retired, he came back to me like skipping. And he was like,
Mm.
this saved my marriage because I had
Mhm.
never had another job except for this one. And I did not realize I hated my life because I hated my
Mhm.
job.
Yeah. Absolutely. All of those things, like those layers, they can certainly have an impact on us. And we just may not recognize the toll that it's taking on us until there's a shift, whether we remove ourselves from that job or another part of our lives. So it's just so important to be aware of those signals that our bodies are sending us.
And I think it's really cool too because I've always thought about it as stress.
Mhm.
I hadn't thought about it as grief, but it is grief.
Mm. Mhm. Absolutely.
That is really, really interesting.
Mhm.
Okay, so why is it dealing with grief or as what people think of as stress? Like,
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about why that's so important.
It's so important because it can catch us off guard.
Mhm.
And I often share with folks, like, we never ever get addicted to touching a hot stove. Like, who does that, right? We never do. We never do. And so sometimes even thinking about broaching this idea of grief, or even as you were saying, like acknowledging that it's a grief experience, you know, that's so important to be able to move forward and to get clarity, and potentially decrease these physical and emotional manifestations. So if
Mhm.
you could advance to the next slide and we'll talk a little bit more of it in detail.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So with dealing with grief, it's important because I think, in society, especially when there are topics that are just so difficult to broach, we can tend to just, they can be inside of us and fester and grow in ways that are unhelpful for us
Mhm.
and lead to those intense physical or emotional implications. So if grief isn't acknowledged or resolved, it could certainly grow into elevated experiences of
Mhm.
stress, anxiety, and depression. So it would be so important to layer on some positive coping practices that we'll discuss and even consider our capacity or our window of tolerance, which we'll talk about, so that we can make sure that we're adequately showing up for ourselves as we're nurturing and engaging like in this grief journey.
All right. I'm sorry. I am stuck
Please.
now on this idea of stress being grief and that we have to like I don't know, like I love the idea now that the only way to really move forward is to understand you are grieving over missing something,
Mhm.
grieving over not living the life that you want to live. Whatever it is that
Mhm.
stress
Mhm.
is grief because
Mhm.
I guess like people kind of inwardly know there's more to life. This is not what life is supposed to be like. And it's the first step is admitting it.
Mhm. Mhm. Admitting it. I remember very clearly, just to share a story, because
Mhm.
folks think, oh my goodness, folks who are therapists and mental health providers, like they must not ever get stressed or anything. But I remember very clearly when I was navigating the experience with my mom and working to support her, as a caregiver. And I remember very clearly, like, as her health began to change, her
Mhm.
quality of health began to change, so did mine. And I didn't recognize it. I recognized that I became very short of breath. Um,
Yeah.
and it's almost like I couldn't get my lungs filled. And I noticed that it was happening when I was asleep. And because I was wondering, I was like, I know this is happening when I'm awake, but I'm waking up at night and I just feel like I have this shallow experience, like there's a blanket over it. Like, what's going on? And so I remember being out of town with my husband, and I was like, you know what, this isn't right. I let me go to urgent care because something just isn't right. And I get there, and I'm discussing with the provider. It was in another city, another state, and just going through sharing that I've had some recent developments in my mom's health that I'm trying to work to support her. And I was like, I don't know what's going on. And the provider at the time, he was saying, you know what, I think it's just an issue with breathing. Here's an inhaler, because I know that a person who is a provider and as a therapist, I really don't think it's stress or anxiety.
Wow.
And here I am having panic attacks, you know? And, I had to get to a place and accept that, oh my gosh, this is having a very significant toll on me. And someone, just because of, I don't know who they think I am, they think that it wouldn't affect me and give me an inhaler. So I say that to say, like, we have to be very aware of these changes with our
Yeah.
body, because we have to figure out some other ways to show up and support ourselves and even get help in other ways when we need it. So I'm sorry, that was a big old tangent after that.
No, I think that backs up so much to what I see is all of these people, like, retiring and
Yeah.
having all of these health issues, and they're not understanding that it is
Mhm,
grief and stress
mhm,
over
mhm,
them knowing. I think that's so interesting.
mhm. It's a part of our identity. When we think about working, and it's not like we just work a few days of our lives in that, just 2 weeks. We work years, 30, 40, 50 years.
Mhm.
And it's attached to who we are and our identity. And so when that begins to kind of like velcro away, you know, it can cause a rupture in our identity too.
Wow. This is going a whole different way than I thought it was gonna go.
Yeah. Yeah. And so even additional considerations.
Mhm,
It's so important to think of how we are as a society.
mhm,
In my I guess point of view or perspective is, with grief, it's something that's so difficult. We don't want to touch it. We don't want to talk about it. We're just supposed to move, not
mhm.
necessarily move through it, but we're just supposed to still keep moving, right? So sometimes society has this expectation of, you know what, that person can have a day off work and they should be done grieving.
Right.
Or, as I've navigated different experiences, primarily with reproductive loss, you know, there may not be that same consideration for
Mhm.
bereavement leave, because it's a different kind of nuance of grief that maybe some places don't acknowledge. So socially, or the societal expectation may push back up, against how we can engage in our process. And culturally, we should certainly take this stance of curiosity with folks who are navigating grief, so we can get a better understanding of what this process looks like for them, because we may have an idea of what we can expect in society, but culturally, when it comes to faith and religion and just different regions, grief is looked at and acknowledged so different. So one size does not fit all for grief.
Yeah, I'll tell you, so I had an experience with this 2 weeks ago. Um, I went to a funeral, and
Yeah.
culturally, I did not realize until I was much older in life, my family has, like, what I consider, like, a cultural tradition that I guess is not the norm for
Okay.
funerals, because when my family has funerals, it is a joyous occasion. We get
Mhm.
together and everyone shows up for the funeral at the funeral
Yeah.
home like an hour early. We
Mhm.
tell funny stories. Everyone is laughing.
Yeah.
And it is like, oh my God, do you remember when so and so did this?
Yeah.
And when you go into the funeral, there is grief in the funeral, but then immediately afterwards, it's back to laughter. Well, so I went to this other funeral and it was just crying the entire time.
Mm.
And I was like, well, thank goodness I didn't walk in like laughing because culturally that would
Mm.
have been so disrespectful. Whereas
Mm.
in mine, it's respectful because you're
Mhm.
respecting the impact that they had on their life.
Yes.
But that would be incredibly insulting to someone who doesn't do funerals that way.
Mm. Yeah, there's so many just the nuance, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, yeah, I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, unresolved grief. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I feel like I'm just really nailing in, we've got to be so aware of the physical symptoms that can emerge.
Mhm.
As I shared, like with my breathing, oh my gosh, like, layering in mindfulness practices and moments of stillness really like helped me tremendously. But
Mhm.
thinking about it, unresolved grief, it doesn't just have to have physical consequences. There can also be, you know, an impact to relationships with others,
Yeah.
making it difficult to maintain connection. So sometimes, in an experience of grief, we might tend to go inward, right? And we might have there may end up being some potential ruptures in relationships.
Mhm.
And so I always encourage people, and I believe I'm probably moving ahead, um, but always seek to make a connection with the grieving person and recognize that whether they respond or not, it's seen. And so to continue to do that and make that connection, make that effort.
Yeah, I think about that sometimes too, because when I have gone through grief, I'm an inward person.
Yeah.
If, um, if something happens to me, I do not wanna talk about it to anyone. I just either want to ignore it and
Hmm.
deal with it inside. However, when people text me, they reach out to me, I usually don't respond, or if I do, I'm like, "Thank you."
Yeah.
But I remember it, and when I'm ready to talk
Yeah.
about it, it may be 6 months later, but I can be
Hmm.
like, "Hey, thank you so much for reaching out. I
Yeah.
really appreciate it." And probably I'm there like, "You didn't even acknowledge it." I didn't acknowledge it, but it didn't mean I didn't notice it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's important.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
So
this is kinda what you went into, right? How to support others with it.
yeah. And so with supporting others, of course, like I know I talked about the stove and things like that, but it's important to be able another catchy one, got to name it to tame it, right? So if it is grief, or if it is anger, if it is stress, we can name it. We don't have to necessarily say it is who we are, right?
Mhm.
But it's an experience. And so as you were saying, like it might take me 6 months to respond. We have to be willing to we have to accept that everybody's tolerance is different as they
Mhm.
navigate grief, right? So they may not have mm, it just may not be on somebody's radar to respond if they're still in that current heavy wave of grief.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's continue on and I'll share some more nuggets here.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's important to acknowledge their pain,
Mhm.
right? It tends, and I would love to hear your thoughts too. I tend to think of a thermometer, right, when I think of grief. There
Mhm.
are and or trauma, right? It's this perception that you have to have enough grief or enough trauma to have a reaction or a response. There's no big or little griefs. If it's affecting them, if that is their perception, we should acknowledge it, right?
Mhm.
That they are having difficulty in adjusting to this absence, this loss, this transition. So it's important to acknowledge it, some statements to facilitate that. I can't imagine how difficult this must be for you, right? I'm here. Letting someone know that, yes, I know you're in a different part of this storm right now. I'm in the boat with you, right?
Yeah.
So making sure that we seek to establish that connection. I remember very clearly, I will tell my Oreo story until I don't remember it anymore, but during the time I had a loss, I sent a message to one of my friends, and literally it just said it happened again. Didn't hear anything back from that person, but after they got off work, they came to my house, bought some Oreos, double stuffed. That's important, and we just watched Netflix. They didn't talk to me about anything. They made themselves available to me.
Oh, that gave me chills.
Yeah, they just made themselves available.
Yeah. Um, I love that because there's someone in my life
Yeah,
that is very close to me, but he's not good at showing emotion,
yeah.
but he's always there.
Mm,
And like I can't even say how much that means because I'm sure it's not always comfortable because he's not comfortable with emotion, but
yeah.
he's there. And sometimes that just means so much is like I think a lot of times people get caught up on the words.
Yes.
Yeah, and the words are not what's important. It's just
Mhm.
Oreos and Netflix.
Oreos and Netflix making the effort, you know, just to be there. It speaks. It can speak more clearly and land a lot different, even so the words. So don't
Yeah,
forget the power of just your presence.
I love that. Love,
Yeah,
love, love that.
and comfort carbs help. So
All right. So we kind of already went over this different opportunities. Okay. This is a big one. People
yeah.
do not like to support themselves, I feel like.
No, no. And I think thinking back to like the societal portion, right?
Mhm,
Potentially, as women and others, we are so conditioned to taking care of other people. And then I'm
mhm.
like, oh my gosh, I always think about teachers, right? Like, did I eat? Did I go to the bathroom today? Because we're just always busy. We're going, 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 going,
Yeah.
going. And so supporting ourselves, oh my goodness, like it's got to be a part of that. It's not a selfish thing to consider what you need. I mean, like, I feel like I'm just a person who just thinks about memes. But basically, we're complicated plants, right? We need water, we need sunlight, we need kind words. I don't have any plants because I have to work on that. But we have to think that we too need to be nurtured, not
Mhm.
just when we're navigating the complex system of grief, but every day, so we can have that routine in place for when the difficulty comes.
Yeah, so I think about this and I share this with my staff a lot.
Mm.
It sounds so silly, but the idea of the grass is always green, but
Okay.
your grass can be green too, but you're
Mhm.
not watering it. And I think so much we look at other people and we're like, I wish I had that life, or I wish I could
Mm.
handle stuff the way they do. But the people that handle stuff well are because they work on it.
Yeah.
It's not like a magic thing. They are taking time to work out, taking time to eat correctly, taking time to go see a therapist.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of times we forget that it takes work to create a happy physical, mental, emotional
It's
life.
true. It's true. I had to grab my phone here because I'm always capturing again memes. And so with thinking of supporting self,
Mhm.
there are layers, and there's something called the Swiss cheese model of self-care.
Okay.
And we know with cheese, because cheese is wonderful, it's beautiful, it's the best thing. But Swiss cheese has holes in it, right?
Mhm.
And so this particular model and or mean, we have everyday stress that has the ability to go through those holes, right? But
Mhm.
the different layers of cheese, they have holes in different places, right?
Yeah.
So a layer, a slice could be connecting with friends.
Mhm.
It could be sleep.
Mhm.
It could be mindfulness. It could be fueling your body. So no single layer can fully protect us. So we must continue to add lots of layers to continue to have the capacity to deal with things.
Yeah, I love that. That makes me think about, like, it's okay to get a housekeeper. It's okay to go out to dinner sometimes. It's
Mhm,
okay to, just all these things. Like, you don't have to be everything. It's layering on that support.
mm-mm. No, you have to be gentle with yourself.
Yes. Love
Yeah.
that. Love that. Oh, here's all right, you're gonna have to explain to me window of tolerance.
So the window of tolerance is like one of my most favorite things in the world
Okay.
because to me, it helps me to be more aware of what my capacity is and
Mhm.
also to reflect and be more open to the capacity of others. So when we're thinking about grief,
Mhm.
when processing grief, right, it's important to stay within our nervous system's window of tolerance. Processing grief in small doses that are manageable, it's more digestible to your nervous system. So, looking at the window of tolerance, anything that has a unicorn has to be gold, right? So, with the window of tolerance, it really speaks to the window. Looking in that little box there.
Okay.
So, our window of tolerance, we lose capacity when there's stress and there's trauma. We can increase our capacity by layering in some of that Swiss cheese, the meditation,
Mhm.
um, prayer, movement, good food, water, staying hydrated, right?
Mhm.
Listening to music, connecting with others, being in the sun, whatever those specific good things are for you, because if we notice that we're at this elevated state of hyperarousal, we might not be able to move through the world as fully as we want. And on the other end of hypoarousal, we might not be able to move through the world as fully as we want. The goal is to stay in the middle and have that balance. So thinking about it, I don't know, I tend to imagine Inside Out, right? Like thinking of the blue sadness character with hypo and kind of anger when I'm thinking of hyper arousal.
Yeah.
So just thinking about those signals and thinking about, you know, if my friend told me that they just recently had a loss or they're a caregiver or they are preparing for retirement and yet they continue to put all these tasks and projects and busying themselves, I
Mhm.
wonder what is the window of tolerance really like? Are they able to really move through their lives in a way that's really good for them? Or are they maybe getting to a place where they could be overwhelmed or burnt out, So it's, I think, a very good reflective tool for us.
I love that. So for the last 2 years, I have been completely overwhelmed with
Mm,
work, building
yeah.
my business, and I have become more aware that I was putting relationships on hold, not because I didn't care about them, but because I physically, mentally, emotionally, I could not take anything else down. So, like,
Right.
I was telling people, and it makes me think of the window. It was like, you know how you put, like, blinders on a horse?
Hmm.
I had blinders on, and
Hmm.
anything that, like, when people would come to me, or, like, people that work with me, people that were loved ones, when they would come to me, I would be like, I can't
Hmm.
right now, come back to me.
Yeah.
And so I could only see this little sliver. And so this year I have been focusing very, very hard on being aware of more things, being aware of limitations, and repairing in some ways like relationships that I had hurt because I was so focused in. And it makes me think like my vision is wider now
Yes.
because I'm like, I do need to do this project. However, this person needs me over here. I need to be
Yeah,
here for my family. And so, yeah, it's widening my window. Yeah,
absolutely.
that
Yeah.
is. I am going to start using that more often. What is your window of tolerance right now?
Absolutely.
Love that. All right, coping skills. Let's go over this.
So with coping skills, like I know with self-care, it can be like, oh my gosh, bubble baths, or I need to do all these things that have a fee attached to them. Like I need to have this day-long spa day, and self-care could mean saying no to something or someone, and that's just it. It could be no. It could be no. It could be whatever you need as you reflect on your window of tolerance and your capacity. We are our first resource. So self care can involve a variety of things. And so I just encourage folks to think of what's good, what's nurturing for them. Is it a nap? Is it water? Is it a
Mhm.
walk? Is it, turning your phone off? Whatever it is, so that we can actively engage in that. I feel that, when we're kids, we're told, hey, go outside and play. Adults, we're told to go clean the toilet. So we have to think about what's good for us in that moment. Yes, we're going to have responsibilities, but I think we can prioritize those responsibilities and make sure we're at the top of that list of self care.
Something that I listened to this talk. It was
Yeah.
maybe back in January, and he said something, and I'm probably going to say it wrong, but it just changed my thoughts. He was like, so many people, when you say like have a self care day, he was like, oh, that's like I'm going shopping, I'm going to take a bubble bath. What you just said, he was like, that is not self. That's not self care. What self care is creating an environment emotionally and mentally to where you don't have to cope by spending money on things.
Yeah.
And that's basically the same thing you said, but that
Mhm.
made me that is one of the things that changed the way that I'm trying to think about stress this year
Mhm.
is what is true self-care. And
Mhm.
it's creating an environment that I don't need to escape from. That's the best self-care.
I thought I heard you almost saying it's prevention.
Yeah, yes. It is.
That's what I thought that was coming up there with myself and with others too, even thinking about self-care. Audre Lorde, love her. Love Audrey. Uh she said caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. And
Mhm.
that is an act of political warfare. So letting these things add up, right? Tending to ourselves. And I think that that could lead into this other piece of emotional expression because we have the capacity to be able to share what's pressing to us,
Mhm.
what we could have a better understanding of what we are, what's happening for us, whether it's stress, whether it's grief, sadness, whatever that is, we could have a better capacity to express it and
Mhm.
not let it, kind of fester and grow in our bodies in these emotional and physical ways that are not helpful to us.
Yeah,
Yep.
I love that.
Yeah. And then the value of connection and empathy, really thinking about how you could maybe show up for someone, and show up for yourself. But is it taking someone a meal? Is it taking someone Oreos? Is it just asking them how they're doing? Any opportunity that we can connect to create just so someone's not isolated in something. Because when we're navigating grief, what I tend to hear the most difficult moments are is when we're alone. I tend to hear when I'm in the shower, or when it's silent, when
Mhm.
it's at night. So making sure that we're showing up at those times, and a person may not know what they need, but we let that door open to let them know that, hey, I'm here for you. And then that goes into the supportive relationships. We need people.
Yeah.
We need people. And so, just making sure that those connections continue to grow and evolve at a pace that's right for that grieving person.
Yeah. One last thing on this one, talking about
Yeah.
supportive relationships. I just had this conversation with someone yesterday. So many people want to age in place, like age in their home.
Mhm.
They don't always realize they're becoming more and more isolated, and they get so caught up in this idea, like, I don't want to go to like a group home or something.
Mhm.
Um, And then when they get into a group home, it's like this whole new life because they're like, I'm
Yes,
spending all this time with people. And a lot of times, I think in our grief, we don't always realize how isolating we're making ourselves and just how important relationships are.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. We need each other.
Yes. Do you have an invitation for me?
I do, and it's a bit. Oh goodness, for those watching and joining us, it's a little bit of math.
Okay.
Well, do you, Tabitha, pop quiz? Do you know the significance of 168?
No, I do not.
What? You're supposed to be a mathematician, and you're
Am
supposed to
I?
know this.
Well, I cannot think of anything. 168.
168 is the amount of hours that we have each week,
Oh.
and so in this invitation to wellness, what I would encourage folks to do is take an audit, to get a piece of paper
Okay.
and to think about, okay, if I had to just take a snapshot of this 168 hours, my last 7 days, how many hours would be appropriated or under the category sleep?
Mm.
How many hours? Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
No, no. I was just thinking like probably I feel like most people either be too little or too much.
Hmm.
Go ahead.
Hmm. So capturing what that looks like for that sleep category. Then thinking about meals.
Mhm.
How much would be captured in that idea or that category of meals? Like how are we showing up for ourselves nutrition wise? Are
Mhm.
we finding any themes where maybe we haven't gone to the store, or maybe we're going to one particular place or restaurant too much or too little?
Yeah. Well, you know what you just made me think of with that with meals is how many meals are we sharing with community and how many are we having alone at our desk?
Absolutely. Or not that I or you would do this, but in our car. It's
Oh, I would
yeah,
never.
we would never do that. Our offices are not in our car. But another thing to think of, you know, in that 168 hours, are there hours attached to work? Are there hours attached to school?
Mhm,
You know, what does that look like in this circle that
mhm,
we have of our 168 hours? And then I would invite you to think about, what about family and friend time?
mhm,
If this was a pie chart, how much of that would be attached to those nurturing relationships that are good for you? It
mhm,
could be with colleagues. It could be with your church community. It could be folks at at the gym you go to. It could
Mhm.
be when you go get your nails done and you're talking to your folks, right? But what would that piece look like for you?
Mhm.
With activities, is there space on there for you to do some things that are restorative to you? Is that represented in these 7 days at all? What's in there,
That
right?
is really interesting because I am thinking now, why don't I take more time during like lunches and invite my daughter to come down and have lunch with me? Invite my boyfriend to come have lunch with me. Invite a
Right?
friend to just instead of just trying to like scarf something down.
Mhm,
Mhm.
mhm. Being intentional with that
Mhm.
and thinking about I know this is the probably the least amount for everyone, but responsibilities,
Yeah.
right? So thinking about responsibilities that unfortunately we can't get away from. I know
Mhm.
that we're probably going to have to wash the dishes, or my favorite game, find the sock, right? So responsibilities, paying bills, going or traveling, or if you have to take kids to games or practices, like what are those responsibilities? And then also personal care. How often, in this last 7 days, where there's some indication of personal care? How
Mhm.
how would you describe how often you showed up for yourself in a way that was good for you?
Yeah.
And then I'm sure there's free time represented in those 168 hours.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
Always.
When I've done this with folks before, it's like they've run out of time, and I'm like, "But you've been doing this whole 168 week for a long time. How are you fitting it all in? How
Yeah.
can I make sure that what's getting in there is the quality and the quantity of what you need?"
Mhm.
Every Are
I
there
love
opportunities to
that.
Yeah.
All
So
right,
that
we're gonna have to check back. I need you to check in
Yeah.
with me weekly and
Okay.
ask me how my 168 are because I am honestly going to make a concentrated effort
Yeah.
to spend my 168 hours differently. I This is
You have heard it
life-changing.
here.
Yeah, that was literally life-changing to think about it like that.
Yeah, and you're worth making any adjustment that's good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Love. Love, love.
Yes.
All right. So you have some resources to share.
Just a few, and there are certainly many, but I wanted to make sure to put some practical resources in folks' hands.
Mhm,
988, that is the new. I say new. I want to say that it started in July last year, but this
mhm.
is the number that you can call if there's ever a mental health, emotional crisis, and you're needing resources. You can call that number 988, or you can text it to be connected to someone that can support you and provide you some additional resources.
Awesome.
Mhm. In addition, there's a few other resources here, websites that have a variety of resources, publications, support
Mhm.
group meetings.
It's
Um,
funny
yes.
because just a few weeks ago,
Mhm.
we did a full series with hospice.
Oh
Yeah,
my
and
goodness.
amazing. So many wonderful resources
Wonderful.
on grief and programs
Mhm.
that they have available.
Yeah.
So, I see we think alike. We both thought of
Mhm.
hospice.
Yes, ma'am. So those are just a few. There are certainly many, but those are the first ones that I draw on very frequently.
Huh. Well, thank you so much, Jerica. This has been great. Literally not even lying, life-changing. I am going to view my 168 hours differently. So you wanna have
Wow.
lunch?
Absolutely. But not in our cars though.
No, 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 we'll have to, like, actually put clothes on and not our
Okay.
sweats, and maybe we'll even put makeup on and go to dinner, go to lunch, do
Okay.
something.
All right. I'll add that into my personal care.
Yes.
I'm 68.
And no talking about work. We're going to relax.
None.
Yeah. I love you so much. Thank you for doing this.
Of course.
I hope you have a wonderful day. Everyone that's watching, Jerica, tell them how they can get in touch with you.
If you advance to the next slide, I have
Oh.
a QR code there with my information, so folks can scan that, or I have my phone number and also my email address. This is to my counseling practice, which is Restored Wellness, West Virginia, and I'm in Bar, West Virginia.
And you're on Facebook under Restored Wellness also.
Yep, Restored Wellness, WV.
All right. I love it. Well, thank you so much. Everyone watching, have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you for spending it with us. Bye, guys.